Once a pirate. The Brits were really slow off the mark in this whole discovering gold and foreign countries lark, but eventually they realised they were losing out, and they decided they wanted a slice of gold pie too. Trouble was, everywhere they went, the Spanish had got there first. There was only one thing to do: rob the Spanish. British sailors became really good at it. Lots of them became extremely rich. One of the most famous was Francis Drake. He sailed all round the world, plundering Spanish ports, attacking Spanish ships, and carrying off boatloads of Spanish gold, half of which he kept for himself, and the other half of which he gave to the Queen of England, Elizabeth I. She was so pleased with all this lovely, shiny gold stuff that she gave him a knighthood and made him Sir Francis Drake. The Spanish were furious. They called Drake the Dragon, and the King of Spain offered 20,000 ducats, which is about £4 million nowadays, to anyone who could find him and kill him. But nobody ever managed it, and Drake kept on bringing home shiploads of gold. Eventually, the Spanish king got so annoyed that in 1588 he sent a fleet of ships, known as the Armada, to attack England. But the English defeated the Spaniards, and Drake, who was one of the English commanders, left the rest of his fleet behind and sailed off to steal a load of yellow stuff from the boat that was carrying all the Spanish sailors' wages. Well, he was a pirate. A New England. Eventually, after years of fighting, England and Spain made peace, which meant the English weren't allowed to rob Spanish ships anymore. Boo! From now on, the English had to get their yellow stuff another way. They came up with a brilliant but simple plan. They'd Bagsy their own bit of America. In December 1606, 3 small ships set sail from London. On board were over 150 men and boys who were planning to look for goldy yellow stuff in North America, just as the Spanish had in South America. They landed at a place on the east coast, which they renamed New England, and set up a little town, which they called Jamestown, named after the new King of England, James I. The girl who liked to play. Unfortunately, despite lots of searching, the settlers didn't find any gold. What they found instead were hundreds of acres of swampy marshland, disease-infested dirty water, mosquitoes, and 14,000 angry Indians who didn't want a bunch of strangers coming over and taking their land. The settlers soon ran out of food. They'd been so busy looking for, you know what I'm talking about, that they hadn't thought about farming. They'd all have died if it hadn't been for the help of a little girl. Pocahontas, which means playful one, was 10 years old when the settlers arrived. Her dad, the local Indian chief, didn't trust the newcomers, but Pocahontas was curious and liked a good laugh, and often visited the settlement to play with the young boys there. When the settlers began to starve, she brought them food. Their leader, Captain John Smith, was taken captive by her father, but she pleaded for his life and saved him from being executed. Eventually, she married another of the English settlers and ended up going back home with him. Everyone in England wanted to meet a real-life Indian princess, and she was even introduced to the king. Life back in Jamestown was getting worse. The settlers came close to giving up and going home. Some were reduced to eating bits of old boot and tree bark to stay alive. But with the help of fresh supplies of food and people, Jamestown eventually began to thrive. By now, other British settlements were springing up across the east coast of America and in nearby places like Canada and the Caribbean. In spite of the hardship they faced, many British people were keen to leave home and set up in the new world. It offered a fresh start, freedom, and an opportunity to make your fortune. And if you had to eat the odd boot along the way, well, so what?